country, or a lot of it has, find themselves in service jobs. And those, retail and janitors and those kind of jobs are similarly low paid, like the industrial jobs of 100 years ago. So now many of those folks are trying to organize. And that is also something that we look at in the festival. We have opportunities for people who are doing organizing work today, labor unions, to tell their story. So there's a whole section of both historical and labor groups. Some of the historical organizations do demonstrations of some historical activities like spinning and weaving and so on.
I've done some weaving myself on a loom, and I can only imagine one of those big mechanized looms.
Oh, the big machines in the mills were beasts, and they didn't stop. They didn't stop for you. But we actually have, this is another great attraction at the festival, we have a traveling power loom from our friends at Lowell National Historical Park, which have to credit for giving us.
If you just go to see that, I'm sure you'll be amazed. I mean, I've woven on one of the desktop ones, essentially with the treadles and pedals, and the woof and I forget what the other one is called.
The warp and the woof.
Woof, yeah.
Absolutely.
And I mean,
it's an amazing machine.
Yeah.
It's absolutely. I mean, it's so complicated. It was the last machine in the textile process, or I should say the last process to be mechanized, because of the complicated movements of the machine in different directions and speeds and so on.
Right.
So our good friends in Lowell at the National Park bring over this power loom that is part of the historical section at the festival. So they run that, and they draw a good crowd throughout the day for that.
I might go just to see that.
Just for that, there you go.
Yeah.
Some of the other historical attractions, we do trolley tours. These are trolley buses, like the kind that give tours in Boston or in Salem. We have 2 of those running through the day, giving 1-hour tours for a total of 10 tours, which are very popular. They tend to fill up. In fact, we have to hand out tickets. It's free, but we have to, control the crowd. So people have to go and get tickets at the tent of the Friends of Lawrence Heritage State Park, who take on that responsibility for us of managing the trolley tours. So if you want to do that, you better go to their tent first, get the tour at the time you want to go, and then you can go and enjoy the festival and show up for the trolley in time. There's also walking tours offered by a local historian who goes into the Mill District and focuses really on the story of the strike in the walking tour. The trolley tours combine both the story of the strike and Lawrence history generally, and takes people around the Mill District. You see the canal, the gigantic mills, the Great Stone Dam, which is a marvel to this day. I mean, it was probably the largest dam in the world when it was built at the founding of Lawrence in the late 1840s. It's an amazing thing to see. So the walking and trolley tours are popular. What else we got going? There's a lot of information vendors, in addition to the labor unions, but social organizations and some commercial organizations in Lawrence or in the area have info tents, and some are selling stuff and some are giving things away. There are craft and artist vendors, and there's a great speaking forum which is called Lawrence History Live, in which we have historians, professional and amateur, and just some local people talking about their research on issues related to the strike or things that are otherwise topical and related, including some folks talking about organizing today.
So how did you get the name Bread and Roses?
Well, do you want the short version or the long?
Well, either one, because I got another question afterwards.
I'll give you the in-between version.
Concrete.
The very simple answer, of course, is what it means. Bread symbolizing survival, roses symbolizing respect. So give us bread and roses is supposedly what the strikers claimed in 1912, meaning give us enough to live and treat us with respect. Now, the phrase itself came from a poem which was written by James Oppenheim, who was one of the observers who came to Lawrence during the strike. He claimed that he saw the phrase on a banner carried by women strikers. Now, we've got no evidence that that actually took place, and in fact, we have learned that his poem was published for the first time in 1911. So he couldn't have based it on a strike that took place in 1912. So that was a little creative myth-making on his part. But his poem about, a thousand mill lofts gray later became put to music and became a song, Bread and Roses, which has been recorded by Judy Collins and Pete Seeger and people like that, and has become kind of an anthem for both labor and women's rights. And the phrase, because of the song, was always associated with the strike in Lawrence in 1912, and just gradually over time became used as the name of the strike. Although really only within the last 30 or so years, about the same time as the strike was revived in Lawrence.
And the concrete question is parking.
Parking, okay.
So everybody has all the information they're going to need to enjoy the...
Well, actually, I may have left out a couple of things, like how to find out all you need to know on our website.
Yep, there is a website. If you guys can put up that URL, so now we can use the new technology.
Excellent, breadandrosesheritage.org, and our website has the schedule, a map, and directions, and pretty much everything you could need to know to enjoy your visit. Parking is really just around the streets. It's a holiday, everything's closed, so folks have been able to find parking on the street in the blocks near the Common without any problem.
Okay. So let's go back to some more of the history. How many people were working in Lawrence at the time in the mills?
The mills employed over 30,000 people at the time of the strike.
So that's bigger than Burlington.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was a city of about 95,000 people at the time, and over 30,000 worked in the mills, and just about everybody else's livelihood was dependent in some way on the earnings and the spending of those that worked in the mill. So when they shut down, due to the strike, it really virtually shut down the whole city. There were a number of people, for one reason or another, who didn't participate in the strike. The opposition was fierce from community leaders, even from religious leaders, many of whom were upset because of the role of the IWW, this radical union.
What is the IWW?
The Industrial Workers of the World, often and fondly referred to as the Wobblies. And they're a very kind of romantic group from that era, led by people like Big Bill Haywood and Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, really legendary figures from the radical wing of the American labor movement at that time. And they came to organize the strike in Lawrence because the mainstream labor movement wouldn't. At that time, the AFL was strictly about skilled white men, and not interested in organizing low or semi-skilled immigrant workers, and certainly not women, and certainly not people of color. So the IWW was the only union that was really willing to come and help the textile workers in Lawrence. But they were radical, and they had a radical reputation, to some extent more so than they really deserved, because they were lumped in with all the other radicals at the time, anarchists and so on, and blamed for violent
nothing we know about
events.
these days.
Nothing that would happen these days, for sure. So that was, they were beyond the pale as far as the leadership in Lawrence was concerned. So a lot of them came out very strongly against the strike. They might have professed a little sympathy with the workers, but you must be these really ignorant immigrants to follow in the leadership of the IWW. Most of the workers did, though, because they knew the IWW were the only people on their side. But some of the folks, the immigrants that had been in Lawrence longer and had kind of moved up the economic ladder a little more, like most of the Irish, a number of the French Canadians, my ancestors. They had moved up to kind of better jobs and owned homes and had more to lose and less to gain by going out on strike. So they didn't participate as actively as the newer immigrants, the Italians, the Lithuanians, the Poles, the Lebanese. They were out in force. So well over 20,000 participated actively in the strike.
And what were the types of textiles that they were actually fabricating?
The mills in Lawrence by that time were making mostly woolen textiles. Originally it was cotton, but it had gradually moved more towards woolens, and particularly worsted woolens, which is fine woolen cloth for men's suits and such. And the school children in Lawrence were taught the phrase, "We weave the world's worsteds," as they were proudly announcing what Lawrence provided to the world. So that was the product. It was dominated, by 1912, it was dominated by one company called the American Woolen Company, about 2/3 of the mills in Lawrence. And the American Woolen was led by an interesting character, unlike most of the managers and owners of the mills, the textile mills in New England, who were, old Yankee families. He was a child of Portuguese immigrants.
Oh, wow.
Born and raised in New Bedford and worked his way up in the mills there, and then came to Lawrence and wanted to be to textiles what Carnegie was to steel and Rockefeller was to oil, and he almost made it. But the strike in Lawrence really struck a blow to his reputation. And he was involved actually in one of the major dramatic episodes in the strike. There were caches of dynamite found in 3 locations. And at first, everyone blamed the strikers, of course, the IWW, those violent anarchists. But the plot quickly unraveled as it was revealed that the dynamite had been planted by a friend of the mill owners. He was actually from a prominent local Irish family. They owned a funeral home. The dynamite was wrapped in the Undertaker's Industry Trade Journal. That's how they traced it to him. Talk about being overconfident. And eventually the plot was connected to William Wood, at least by implication.
And who's William Wood?
He is that head of the American Woolen Company, that child of Portuguese immigrants who tried to join the Yankee Brahmin elite. So there was some evidence that connected him to the dynamite plot. But they were not able to prove it in court, ultimately. The other great dramatic episode during the strike is the children's exodus. During the strike, of course, without much income, certainly there were donations made to a strike fund for relief, but people were hurting, and so the kids weren't getting enough food, etc. So many of them were sent off to stay with sympathizers in other cities by the trainload to New York, to Barry, Vermont. And when a group was about to be sent to Philadelphia, the authorities, the police and militia, stopped them forcibly with mothers and children ended up being thrown into paddy wagons. And they thought they had bad publicity before from the kids being sent away. Well, that was much worse, and that really is what finally led to the settlement of the strike in the strikers' favor.
Wow. This has been an exciting story. I'm really glad you have been able to appear, Jim.
It's been my pleasure.
I hope you'll come back and talk more about the history. We'll get some graphics and be able to show people because everybody thinks the history of Massachusetts is a revolution, but there's so much more to Massachusetts so much more to the history of it. I'd love to have you come back again. I really would.
I'd be glad to.
So thank you very much. And it's, what's the date of the festival?
Labor Day, September 2, in Lawrence, 12 to 6.
Yep. So I hope to see everybody there. I might even go.
Good. I'll look for you.
Okay. Thank you again.
You bet. Thanks again.